Wealthy man throws trash bag with baby inside, but this horse saw everything and does something. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The rain hammered against the windshield of the pickup truck, creating a deafening roar that echoed through the empty cab. Walt Thompson gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his nervous eyes darting between the dark road and the black plastic bag swaying on the passenger seat. It was almost 3 a.m. in March of 2019, and the streets of Willow Creek, Montana were deserted, as if the town itself was conspiring to keep his secret. The 52-year-old businessman, known around the county for his cold, calculating demeanor and impeccable reputation, felt sweat trickle down his forehead despite the cold night air. Inside the bag, something moved slightly, emitting almost imperceptible sounds that made his stomach churn. He tried not to think about what he was doing, focusing only on the need to protect everything he had worked for decades. Months earlier, when he found out about the pregnancy of Jolene "Jo" Smith, his young housekeeper, Walt had made what he considered the most practical decision: fire her immediately under the guise of restructuring the household. He offered her a sum of money to take care of the problem and disappear from his life, but the girl had refused, citing her religious beliefs. Now, 3 months after the birth, he was forced to take more drastic measures. The truck swerved violently as it hit a pothole, causing the bag to slide onto the floor. Walt slammed on the brakes at the side of the road, his heart pounding. For a moment, he considered turning back and finding another solution, but the memory of his wife sleeping peacefully at home, trusting his story that he had gone out to check on the cattle due to the storm, made him continue. He drove along the dirt roads until he reached the back of his own property, a secluded area where the pasture stretched to meet a small wood. It was the perfect place. Far enough from the main house, but still within his land. If anyone found something there, he could claim complete ignorance. Walt got out of the truck in the torrential rain, picked up the bag with trembling hands, and walked to an area sheltered by a few trees. He placed the burden on the ground with excessive care, as if the gesture could diminish the gravity of his actions. For a moment, he heard a faint cry coming from inside the plastic and felt a pang in his chest, but he quickly pushed aside any feelings of remorse. "It's for the best," he muttered to himself, trying to convince himself. She wouldn't have had a future anyway, daughter of a penniless maid. At least now she won't suffer a life of poverty. What Walt didn't know was that he wasn't alone that rainy morning. About 50 yards away, a white horse watched everything in silence. The animal, which had taken shelter from the rain under a leafy tree, had its ears perked up, catching every sound, every movement of the man who had just committed an unthinkable act. When Walt returned to the truck and drove away, leaving only the sound of the engine fading into the distance, the horse remained motionless for a few minutes. Then, moved by an instinct that it didn't even understand, it began to approach the place where the bag had been abandoned. The rain continued to fall, each drop seeming to hammer against the plastic that precariously protected the fragile life. Inside, the horse sniffed the air, smelling a familiar but disturbing scent. Carefully, it touched the bag with its muzzle, noticing the slight movement that indicated something was alive inside. Without hesitation, the animal began to tear the plastic with its hooves, working with surprising precision to avoid hurting whatever was inside. When it finally managed to open a large enough gap, its eyes met a sight that would change its life forever. A baby of a few months old, wet, shivering with cold, but alive. The little creature opened her eyes and stared directly at it, as if recognizing in it a protective force. At that moment, a connection was established that transcended any logical explanation. The horse lay down next to the baby, covering her with its warm body and protecting her from the rain that was still falling relentlessly. Throughout that endless night, while Walt tried to sleep in his comfortable bed, tormented by nightmares. The horse kept watch. It warmed the child with its body heat, gently licking her little face to keep her awake and breathing. Every time she cried, it neighed softly, as if trying to soothe her with its comforting presence. When the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the rain finally stopped. The baby had survived the hardest night of her life, thanks to the unlikely four-legged angel who had found her. The horse got up carefully, making sure she was protected, and began to neigh louder as if calling for help. About 200 yards away, in a small wooden house near the road, Stella Riley was preparing her morning coffee when she heard the insistent neighing. The 67-year-old widow, accustomed to the sounds of the countryside, was puzzled by the persistence and almost desperate tone of the animal. Something wasn't right. Stella put her cup of coffee on the worn wooden table and walked to the kitchen window, pulling back the gingham curtain to observe better. The white horse continued to neigh desperately, running in circles in a specific area of the pasture. In her 67 years living in that region, she had never seen an animal behave that way. She slipped on her rubber boots, still muddy from the previous night's rain, and left the house, walking through the wet grass towards the insistent cries of the animal. The morning sun created a light mist that rose from the soaked ground, giving an almost ghostly air to the rural landscape. "What's wrong, boy?" she murmured, approaching cautiously. The horse saw her coming and increased the intensity of its neighing, running towards her and then back to the same spot, as if trying to guide her. When Stella finally reached the location, her eyes widened in horror. Scattered on the ground were pieces of torn black plastic, and in the center of it all, a tiny baby was lying on the damp grass. The child was awake, but her lips had a worrying bluish color, and her little body was shaking uncontrollably. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Stella, kneeling immediately next to the baby. "Who did this? What kind of monster would abandon such a small creature like this?" She quickly took off her own wool sweater and wrapped the girl carefully, feeling how cold her little body was. The baby opened her eyes and looked at her with an expression that mixed relief and despair. Stella felt her heart break as she realized that the child had probably spent the whole night in the open. The horse approached and began to sniff the baby delicately, as if checking her condition. Stella noticed that there was white hair stuck to the girl's clothes, and she immediately understood what had happened during the night. "It was you who took care of her, wasn't it?" she asked the animal, stroking its neck with gratitude. "You saved this little one's life." Carrying the baby against her chest, Stella ran back to the house, followed closely by the horse, who showed no intention of leaving. Inside the house, she heated water and prepared a warm bath, carefully washing the child, who was crying softly, a weak cry that demonstrated her weakness. During the bath, Stella discovered that it was a girl, apparently a few months old. She had light brown hair and large, expressive eyes that seemed to understand everything around her. Even more impressively, she had a small birthmark on her right wrist, in the shape of a half-moon. "You need a name, my little one," said Stella, drying her with warm towels. "Iris. Your name will be Iris, like the flowers that bloom after storms." Stella improvised a bottle with warm milk and sugar, since she didn't have infant formula at home. The baby accepted the food eagerly, sucking with a force that revealed her extreme hunger. While feeding Iris, the widow watched through the window the white horse that remained in the yard, like a silent guardian. During the following days, Stella went out of her way to take care of the girl. She sold some chickens to buy proper formula, diapers and clothes in the neighboring town. Iris was malnourished and showed signs of hypothermia, but gradually began to recover under the woman's loving care. The horse established permanent residence in Stella's yard, refusing to return to wherever its original home was. During the day, It grazed peacefully nearby, but always kept Iris within its field of vision. At night, it lay down next to the window of the room where the baby slept, as if standing guard. 3 weeks after the rescue, Stella took Iris to the town's health clinic for a checkup. The nurse, Connie Sanders, examined the child carefully and was concerned about some aspects of her condition. "Ms. Riley, this child has been through severe trauma," explained Connie. "She has signs of prolonged hypothermia and malnutrition." "Where did you say you found her again?" Stella repeated the version she had rehearsed. She said that the baby was the daughter of a distant cousin who had passed away, and that she had taken over the care of the girl. It was a lie, but a necessary lie to protect Iris from red tape that could separate them. "You'll need to register her officially," said Connie, "and also seek government assistance. Taking care of a baby isn't easy, especially at your age." When they returned home, Stella found an unexpected surprise. Walt Thompson was standing in front of the gate, talking to some neighbors. Her heart raced immediately, and she hugged Iris protectively against her chest. "Ms. Riley," said Walt with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I heard you adopted a child. That's a beautiful thing, such a Christian attitude." "She's my great-niece," replied Stella dryly, trying to hide her nervousness. "Daughter of a cousin who passed on." Walt approached to get a better look at the baby, and at that moment something extraordinary happened. Iris, who was sleeping peacefully, opened her eyes and began to cry desperately upon seeing him. It wasn't a common baby's cry, but a scream of pure terror that made everyone present shiver. The horse, which was grazing calmly a few yards away, raised its head abruptly upon hearing the cry, its eyes fixed on Walt with a disturbing intensity, and it began to neigh agitatedly, stomping its hooves on the ground in a threatening manner. "Looks like the animals don't like me much today," Walt tried to joke, but his voice trembled slightly. Stella noticed the reaction of both the baby and the horse, and a terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. Iris only stopped crying when Walt moved away, and the horse only calmed down when the man stayed at a safe distance. "I better get going," said Walt, visibly uncomfortable. "If you need anything for the girl, you can look me up. I always like to help families in the area." After he left, Stella remained thoughtful. There was something very strange about the coincidence of Walt appearing just when she brought Iris to town for the first time, and the reactions of the baby and the horse were impossible to ignore. That night, while rocking Iris to sleep, Stella again observed the birthmark on the girl's wrist. It was a very distinctive mark, and she had the feeling of having seen something similar before, but she couldn't remember where. The horse remained especially vigilant throughout the night, neighing softly whenever it heard any strange noise. It was as if it knew that some danger had approached during the day and was determined not to allow anything to happen to the child it had saved. Stella fell asleep late, with Iris nestled in her arms and an unsettling feeling that her simple life had become much more complicated than she imagined. Outside, the white horse stood guard under the moonlight, its alert eyes turned to the darkness, as if expecting someone to try to return to finish what they had started on that rainy March night. The following months brought an intense routine for Stella. Iris grew quickly, but still showed after effects of the abandonment. The girl had inexplicable crying spells during the early morning hours, as if nightmares tormented her even so small. Stella spent sleepless nights, rocking the child and humming songs from her own childhood to soothe her. The white horse, whom Stella began to call Whitey for lack of creativity, became an integral part of the family. During the day, it grazed in the yard and watched every movement of the baby. When Iris cried, Whitey approached the window and neighed softly, and somehow this always helped to calm the girl. In December, when Iris turned 8 months old, a severe drought began to plague the Willow Creek area. The pastures turned yellow, the ponds dropped drastically, and many cattle ranchers began to face serious difficulties. Stella, who depended on a small garden and some chickens to supplement her income, saw her plants wither one by one. The financial situation became even more complicated when Iris developed a respiratory infection that required expensive medication. Stella sold her last valuables, including her wedding ring, to pay for the treatment. During this difficult period, something extraordinary happened. Whitey began to bring small, wild berries and edible roots that he found in the fields, depositing them near the door of the house. "This horse is a blessing," murmured Stella, collecting the food that the animal brought. She prepared teas with the herbs and cooked the roots, taking advantage of every resource that nature offered through her four-legged protector. Walt, meanwhile, faced his own difficulties. The drought devastated much of his herd, and he was forced to sell parcels of land to maintain his operations. His wife, Nancy, began to question his financial decisions, and arguments at home became frequent. To make matters worse, he discovered that Stella had signed up to receive government assistance for Iris's care. "He can't let her receive that money for a child that isn't really hers," Walt thought, obsessed with the idea of controlling every aspect of the situation. He began to make regular visits to Stella's house, always under the pretense of helping the community or checking if she needed anything. During one of these visits, in January, Iris was already crawling and demonstrated exceptional intelligence for her age. She observed everything around her with curious eyes and was already trying to imitate some sounds. When Walt arrived, the child's reaction was even more intense than the first time. She not only cried, but quickly crawled backwards, trying to hide behind Stella's legs. Whitey, who was drinking water from a nearby bucket, raised his head immediately and positioned himself between Walt and the house. His eyes fixed on the man conveyed an almost human hostility. "That horse has something against me," commented Walt, trying to appear nonchalant. "Maybe I should call someone to take him away. A wild animal like that can be dangerous for the child." "Whitey has never hurt anyone," replied Stella firmly. "He protects Iris as if she were his daughter. I won't allow anyone to take my horse away from here." During this conversation, Iris did something that left everyone present disturbed. The girl, still hidden behind Stella, began to emit sounds that vaguely resembled words. And among these sounds, clearly audible, came something that sounded like, "No! No!" Walt turned pale. A 10-month-old baby shouldn't be able to speak, let alone with the tone of despair that Iris demonstrated. He said goodbye quickly and left, but not before noticing that Stella was watching him with a thoughtful and suspicious expression. That night, Stella had difficulty getting Iris to sleep. The girl was restless, crying and thrashing in her makeshift crib. It was only when Whitey approached the window and began to neigh softly that she calmed down. Stella watched, fascinated, as the child stretched out her little arms towards the animal, as if wanting to touch it. "What a strange connection you two have," she murmured, stroking Iris's hair. "It's as if you remember him from somewhere." In early February, an event completely changed the dynamics of the house. Iris, who could already stand by holding on to the furniture, tried to take her first steps to reach Whitey, who was near the fence in the yard. She managed to take 2 wobbly steps before tripping and hitting her head on the corner of a wooden bench. The bleeding was intense, and Iris lost consciousness for a few seconds. Stella panicked, picked up the girl in her arms, and ran towards the road, screaming for help. Whitey, seeing the situation, began to neigh desperately, running in circles and seeming as distressed as Stella herself. By a coincidence that would later seem almost impossible, Walt was passing by the road at that exact moment, returning from a meeting at the county hall about aid for ranchers affected by the drought. When he saw Stella running with a bloody Iris in her arms, he had no choice but to stop and help. "Quick, let's get to the hospital," he shouted, opening the door of the pickup truck. During the drive to the neighboring town, something extraordinary happened. Iris, semi-conscious and moaning in pain, stretched out her little arms towards Walt and murmured something that sounded clearly like, "Daddy." Walt almost lost control of the steering wheel. Stella, sitting in the back seat holding the girl, heard perfectly, and her eyes widened in shock. A 1-year-old child shouldn't be able to articulate that word so clearly, especially not to a man, who was supposedly a stranger. "She's delirious from the bump," Walt said quickly, but his voice was visibly trembling. At the hospital, while Iris was receiving stitches on her head, the on-duty nurse, Joe Peterson, made a casual comment that chilled the blood of everyone present. "What a beautiful girl," he said, observing Iris. "She has the same eyes as you, doesn't she? And that mark on her wrist, it's exactly like the one you have." Stella looked immediately at Walt's wrist, and there it was. A birthmark in the shape of a half-moon, identical to Iris's. It was a detail she had seen before, but had never paid attention to until that moment. Walt noticed Stella's gaze and quickly pulled his shirt sleeve down to cover the mark. "Coincidence," he muttered. "Those marks are more common than people think." But Stella wasn't foolish. Decades of life had taught her to read people, and at that moment, seeing Walt nervous, sweating and avoiding her gaze, she understood a terrible truth. Iris's reactions, Whitey's hostility, the identical birthmark, Walt's sudden appearance in town on the day she brought the girl for the first time, everything began to make a macabre sense. During the drive back home, with Iris sleeping in her arms due to the medication, Stella remained silent, but her mind was racing with questions and suspicions. When they arrived, Whitey greeted them at the door, sniffing Iris carefully and showing relief upon realizing that she was okay. "Thank you for your help," said Stella coldly to Walt, "but I think it's best if you don't come here anymore. Iris gets very agitated in your presence." Walt tried to protest. "Ms. Riley, I just want to help. If the girl has a problem with me, I can try." "There's no need," she cut him off. "Iris and I are well taken care of." That night after Walt left, Stella sat on the porch with Iris in her lap, watching. Whitey graze under the moonlight. The girl had woken up and was playing silently with Stella's fingers, apparently without any after effects from the accident. "What secret are you keeping, my little one?" whispered Stella, kissing the bandaged forehead of the child. "And you, Whitey, what did you see that night?" As if understanding the question, the horse approached and nuzzled its muzzle into Stella's hand. Its eyes seemed to carry a weight, a silent wisdom that only animals possess when they witness human cruelty. Stella knew that her life had become dangerously complicated. Her suspicions about Walt were too serious to ignore, but also too dangerous to confront directly. She needed proof, and more importantly, she needed to protect Iris at all costs. From that night on, she began to carefully plan her next steps, knowing that she was dealing with a man capable of unimaginable acts. The following months were marked by a growing tension that hung over Stella's small property like a loaded cloud. Iris, now a 1.5 years old, had fully recovered from the accident, but developed an inexplicable fear of heights and suffered recurring nightmares that made her wake up screaming in the middle of the night. In those moments, only the presence of Whitey near the window could calm her down. Walt had respected Stella's request not to visit them, but his presence was felt in other ways. Neighbors began to comment that he had been asking questions about Iris, wanting to know details about her health, development, and even about the government assistance that Stella received, always subtly, as if it were just community interest. In May of 2020, when the girl turned 2 years old, a disturbing event came to further shake the fragile peace of their lives. Stella was hanging clothes on the clothesline when she heard Iris, playing alone in the yard, talking animatedly. Thinking that the child was talking to Whitey, she didn't pay much attention initially. But when she approached to listen better, she froze upon realizing what Iris was saying. The girl, sitting on the grass and playing with some pebbles, spoke in a low but clear tone. Big house, heavy door, bad man, dark. Stella knelt beside the girl, trying to disguise her disturbance. What house is that, sweetheart? Where? Did you see that? Iris looked at her with her big, serious eyes, too mature for a 2-year-old child. Dream, she said simply, returning to play as if nothing had happened. But the description that Iris had made corresponded exactly to Walt Thompson's mansion. A large house with a heavy main door made of carved wood, known to everyone in the region. How could a child who had never been there describe these details? At the end of May, Stella received an unexpected visit that would change everything. A middle-aged man, wearing simple but well-kept clothes, appeared at her door, introducing himself as Anthony Tony Lewis, a private investigator. He was thin, had greying hair, and tired eyes that seemed to have seen a lot of bad things in life. "Ms. Riley, I apologize for bothering you," he said, taking off a worn cap. "I'm looking for information about abandoned babies in the area for about 2 years. I was hired by a woman who is looking for her daughter." Stella's heart raced, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I don't know anything about that. My granddaughter came to live with me after my niece passed away." Tony observed Iris, who was playing in the yard under Whitey's watchful eye. "May I have the full name of the girl's parents? I need to eliminate all possibilities for my investigation." Stella made up names on the spot, but noticed that Tony wrote everything down carefully in a worn notebook. She was sure that he hadn't believed her story. After the investigator left, Stella spent the whole night without sleeping, imagining terrible scenarios. If Iris's biological mother was alive and looking for her daughter, her little family could be destroyed. But at the same time, she felt guilty for denying a mother the right to find her child. 3 days later, Walt appeared at her door unannounced, visibly nervous and sweating despite the mild weather. "Ms. Riley, I heard that a stranger has been asking questions around here, investigator or something like that." "How did you know that?" she asked, immediately suspicious. "Oh, news travels fast in a small town," he replied, avoiding her gaze. "I just came to check if everything was okay. Those kinds of people are sometimes involved in bad things." During this conversation, Iris was playing near them, apparently distracted with her wooden toys. But when Walt mentioned the investigator, she stopped playing and looked directly at him with a strange expression. "Man looking for mommy," she said suddenly, with a clarity that left all the adults in shock. Walt turned pale. What does she mean by that?" Stella quickly picked up Iris in her arms. "She's still learning to speak. Sometimes she says things without making sense." But Iris continued to stare at Walt and repeated, "Mommy far away. Man-made mommy. Go away." The tension in the air became almost palpable. Whitey, who had been grazing peacefully, raised his head and began to approach, his eyes fixed on Walt with the usual hostility. "We better get going," muttered Walt, clearly disturbed by the child's words. "If that investigator comes back, let me know. It's not good for the community to have strangers asking questions." After he left, Stella sat on the porch with Iris in her lap, trying to process everything that had happened. The girl seemed to know things that she shouldn't know, as if she kept memories of events that she had lived through when she was too small to remember. "My love," she said softly, "who is that mommy you were talking about?" Iris rested her head on Stella's shoulder. "Mommy cries. Mommy looking for Iris. Bad man doesn't let." The child's words confirmed Stella's worst suspicions. Walt was not only Iris's father, he had separated mother and daughter on purpose, probably through cruel methods. A week later, Tony Lewis returned, but this time he wasn't alone. A thin young woman, about 25 years old, was with him. She had brown hair like Iris's and eyes of the same shape. When she saw the girl playing in the yard, her legs trembled and she leaned on the gate. "My daughter," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's her, I'm sure." Stella came out of the house feeling as if the world was collapsing around her. The woman introduced herself as Jolene Smith, and her story was heartbreaking. She had worked as a housekeeper for Walt Thompson, who had impregnated her through methods that she didn't have the courage to detail completely. "He fired me when he found out I was pregnant," said Jolene, her voice choked up. "He offered money for me to get rid of the baby. When I refused, he said he would destroy me if I told anyone that he was the father." Stella listened to the story with a broken heart, knowing that every word was true. Jolene explained that she had given birth in a neighboring town, but when she returned to look for work in Willow Creek to support her daughter, she discovered that Iris had disappeared. "I left her with a neighbor for one night only, to work at a party," cried Jolene. "When I came back, she was gone. The neighbor said that a man had come and taken the baby, saying that he was a relative of mine." Iris, who had hidden behind Stella's legs when she saw the strangers, was now watching Jolene with curiosity. Slowly, she approached the young woman and touched her face with her small hands. "Mommy," she said softly, as if recognizing something familiar. Jolene burst into sobs, kneeling, down to be at her daughter's height. "My little one, Mommy looked for you so much, so much." Stella felt as if her heart was being torn from her chest. Iris had been her whole life for 2 years, but how could she deny a mother the right to embrace her own daughter? Whitey, who had watched the whole scene, approached Jolene and sniffed her carefully. After a few seconds, he neighed softly and nuzzled his muzzle into her hand, as if approving her. "Even Whitey recognizes you," murmured Stella, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. Tony explained that they had enough evidence against Walt, but needed more details to build a solid case. "That man ruined many lives," he said. "It's time for him to pay for everything he did." That night, after Jolene and Tony left with the promise to return the next day, Stella stayed awake, watching Iris sleep. The girl was restless, as if she sensed that her life was about to change drastically. Whitey remained especially close to the house, neighing softly whenever he heard any strange noise. It was as if he knew that difficult times were coming, and he was determined to protect his adoptive family until the end. The following days were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions for everyone involved. Jolene had decided to stay in town for a few days, lodging at a small motel downtown to gradually rebuild her relationship with Iris. Stella, as much as her heart bled, knew that it was the best thing for the girl. During these daily visits, something extraordinary happened. Iris, who initially was shy with Jolene, began to demonstrate an inexplicable connection with her. It was as if something deep in her memory recognized that woman. Whitey also seemed to approve of Jolene, allowing her to approach Iris without demonstrating any hostility. Walt, however, was entering total panic. Through his contacts in town, he had discovered about the presence of Jolene and the investigator. On the morning of a rainy Wednesday in June, he appeared at Stella's house unannounced, visibly desperate. "Ms. Riley, I need to speak with you. Urgently," he said, pushing the door open before even being invited in. Stella was giving Iris breakfast, who immediately began to cry upon seeing Walt. The child's reaction was always the same, a deep terror that seemed to come from somewhere very dark in her soul. "You weren't invited in," Stella said firmly, holding Iris in her arms. "That woman who showed up here, that Jolene," began Walt, ignoring Stella's coldness. "She's a liar, a person without character who abandoned her own daughter and now wants to come back to cause problems." "How do you know her name?" asked Stella, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Walt realized that he had given himself away. I heard comments in town. People talking about—" "You're her father," Stella said suddenly, her voice loaded with accusation. That's why Iris is terrified when she sees you. That's why Whitey hates you. You were the one who abandoned my girl to die." Walt's face turned ashen. For a moment he considered denying everything, but the weight of the truth was becoming impossible to carry. "You don't understand," he murmured. "I couldn't. My reputation, my family. I couldn't take on a bastard daughter." The partial confession was like a punch to Stella's stomach. "Monster," she whispered. "You abandoned your own daughter to die like an animal." Iris, who was still crying in Stella's arms, suddenly stopped and looked directly at Walt. "Rain," she said clearly. "Black bag. Cold. Bad Daddy made Iris go away." The child's words left Walt terrified. How could a 2-year-old girl remember details from when she was a baby? It was impossible, but at the same time, she had described exactly what had happened that terrible night. "She can't remember that," he stammered. "It's impossible." "Get out of my house," shouted Stella. "Get out now before I call Tony and tell him everything you just admitted." Walt left in a panic, but not before making a veiled threat. "If you tell that investigator anything, you'll regret it. I have influence in this town, and I can make your life a living hell." That afternoon, when Jolene arrived for her daily visit, Stella told her everything that had happened. The young woman was devastated to learn that Walt had confessed partially, but not surprised. "He was always cruel," said Jolene, stroking Iris's hair while the girl played in her lap. "When I worked in his house, I saw how he treated the employees, the animals, even his own wife. He's a man without a soul." It was at that moment that Tony arrived with disturbing news. "Walt is trying to bribe people in town," he said. "He offered money for some people to spread rumors about you, Jolene, saying that you were addicted to drugs, that you abandoned your daughter out of negligence." Walt's strategy was clear: destroy Jolene's credibility before she could formalize any accusations against him. But his haste and desperation were causing him to make mistakes that only confirmed his guilt. During the conversation, something terrible happened. Iris, who was playing peacefully in the yard, suddenly began to scream desperately. Everyone ran outside and found her pointing to the road, where a cloud of dust indicated that a vehicle had passed quickly. Whitey was agitated, neighing violently and running from one side to the other. On the ground, near the gate, there was a crumpled note that said, "Stop causing problems or you'll all regret it." "He's getting desperate," said Tony, examining the note. "Desperate men are dangerous. I need to speed up my investigation." That night, something even more disturbing happened. Stella woke up to Iris screaming in the middle of the night. Not the normal nightmare cry, but screams of absolute terror. When she got to the room, she found the girl in a state of panic, pointing to the window. "Bad man," cried Iris. "Bad man is outside." Stella looked out the window but saw nothing but darkness. Whitey, however, was visibly agitated in the yard, staring at a specific point near the fence. The next morning, they discovered footprints of boots near the window of Iris's room. Someone had been there during the night, watching the house. "He's watching us," said Jolene, visibly shaken. "We need to do something before he tries something worse." It was then that Tony made a radical decision. "I'm going to confront Walt directly," he said. "I have enough evidence to at least pressure him. And if he confessed partially to you, Miss Riley, maybe he'll confess everything under pressure." But before they could execute any plan, the situation took a completely unexpected turn. Iris, who had been strange throughout the day, refusing to eat and crying for no apparent reason, suddenly had a crisis of high fever. Stella and Jolene rushed her to the health clinic, where they discovered that the girl had developed severe pneumonia. The emotional stress of the last few days, combined with exposure to the cold during the storm of the previous week, had weakened her immune system. "She needs to be admitted immediately to the big city," said the doctor. "The case is serious." During the drive to the hospital, with Iris semi-conscious in Jolene's arms, something extraordinary happened. The girl, in a delirious state due to The high fever began to say things that chilled the blood of everyone present. "Daddy said that nobody would want Iris," she murmured. "Daddy said that Mommy was bad. Daddy put Iris in the bag and took her away." Very dark, very cold. Iris cried, but Daddy didn't come back. The words came intermittently, like fragments of memory that the fever had released from somewhere deep in her mind. They were details too specific to be invented by a 2-year-old. "A child. White horse saved Iris," she continued, her eyes closed but the words becoming clearer and clearer. "White horse warmed Iris when Daddy went away. White horse is good. Daddy is bad." Jolene was crying silently, finally understanding completely the trauma that her daughter had suffered. Stella held the girl's hand, feeling as if her heart would explode with pain. At the hospital, while Iris fought against pneumonia, connected to machines and receiving oxygen, the doctors were impressed by her feverish deliria. The descriptions she made were too detailed, too specific to be fantasies of a sick child. One of the nurses, who had known the Thompson family for years, heard some of Iris's accounts and began to connect the dots. She remembered old rumors about Walt and his housekeepers, inappropriate behaviors that were always muffled by his influence in the town. "Doctor," she said to the responsible doctor, "I think this child is revealing something very serious. Maybe we should document what she is saying." And so, on a rainy hospital night, with Iris fighting for her life between machines and tubes, the truth about Walt Thompson finally began to come to light. Each delirious word of the girl was another nail in the coffin of the reputation of the man who had tried to destroy her before she even had the chance to live. Iris remained hospitalized for 2 weeks, fighting against the pneumonia that threatened her life. During this period, the words she had spoken in her feverish deliria spread throughout the hospital and reached the ears of influential people in the region. The nurse who had documented her accounts delivered the report to Tony, who realized he had in his hands powerful evidence against Walt. Meanwhile, Walt was completely losing control. Knowing that Iris was talking about that terrible night, he made a desperate decision. On a July morning, he loaded his truck with the little money he had left and tried to flee the town, intending to start a new life in another state where no one knew him. But fate had other plans. On the dirt road leading to the main highway, blinded by the rain and despair, Walt lost control of the vehicle on a sharp curve. The truck overturned, trapping him in the twisted wreckage. Wounded and unable to move, he cried for help for hours under the storm. It was Whitey who found him. The horse, who had gone out on one of his nightly walks through the territory, heard the cries for help coming from the road. For a moment, the animal stood still, observing the man who had caused so much suffering to the child he protected. It would be easy to simply move on, let nature take its course, but something greater than revenge moved the generous heart of the horse. Whitey positioned himself near the overturned truck, neighing loudly and persistently until his voice echoed through the early morning. For hours, he kept the vultures away and protected Walt from the cold rain, using his own body as a shield. When the first residents passing by the road found the scene at dawn, they were impressed to see the white horse standing guard over the injured man. Walt was rescued and taken to the hospital in the neighboring town, where he remained hospitalized for several days. During his recovery, tormented by physical pain and constant nightmares about baby Iris abandoned in the rain, Walt began to understand the magnitude of his monstrosity. The fact that he had been saved by the same horse that had witnessed his most heinous crime forced him to confront his own lost humanity. When Iris finally recovered from pneumonia and was discharged from the hospital, news about Walt's accident had already spread throughout Willow Creek. But there were more surprising events to come. Tony had used Iris's hospitalization time to deepen his investigation. He discovered that Walt had not only abandoned a child, For years, he had exploited farm workers, evaded taxes, polluted water springs with illegal chemicals, and threatened entire families who tried to denounce his practices. "This man has been a cancer in the community for decades," Tony told Stella and Jolene, while Iris played quietly in her biological mother's lap. "But now we have enough evidence to expose everything." It was when Walt made the decision that would change everything. On an August morning, still with bandages from the injuries of the accident, he appeared at the town's church during Sunday Mass. He interrupted the priest's sermon and asked to speak to the congregation. "I need to confess my sins before all of you," he said, his voice trembling with genuine emotion. "For years, I was a monster who hid behind money and influence." What followed was a full confession that shocked the entire community. Walt revealed the abandonment of Iris, detailing how he had taken the baby from Jolene through blackmail and threats, and how he had left her to die on a rainy night. But he didn't stop there. He confessed to years of exploitation of workers, paying miserable wages while accumulating wealth. He admitted to dumping chemicals into springs, causing the drought that devastated the region. He revealed that he had bribed local authorities and threatened entire families to keep his secrets. "I was saved by a horse," he said, tears streaming down his face. "The same horse that witnessed my most terrible crime protected me when I didn't. Deserved protection that showed me that even animals are more human than I ever was." The public confession had immediate consequences. Several families in the region came forward to report abuses they had suffered at the hands of Walt over the years. Lawsuits were opened, and all of Walt's assets were confiscated to compensate his victims. A substantial amount was earmarked specifically for the lifetime care of Iris, ensuring that she would never go through hardship again. Another part was used to finance environmental recovery projects in the region, cleaning the springs that he had polluted. 3 months later, on a sunny November afternoon, Stella's house had been renovated and expanded with the money from the compensation. Jolene had moved in permanently, and the two women had reached a beautiful agreement. They would raise Iris together, combining Stella's unconditional love with Jolene's biological connection. Iris, now 3 years old, had completely recovered from all the trauma. She called Stella Grandma and Jolene Mommy, understanding instinctively that she had been blessed with two mothers who loved her deeply. Her special connection with Whitey remained strong. The horse had officially become part of the family, grazing peacefully in the yard and continuing his role as a silent protector. Walt, who had lost everything, now worked as a ranch hand on farms in the region, using every penny he earned to pay his debts and compensations. He visited Stella's house weekly, always supervised by the two mothers, to contribute to Iris's support and gradually try to build some kind of relationship. With his daughter Iris, with the precocious wisdom of someone who has survived great trauma, accepted these visits with caution but without fear. Whitey allowed Walt's presence, but always remained alert, ready to protect his girl if necessary. "Daddy did very bad things," Iris said one day to Stella, watching Walt work in the yard repairing a broken fence. "But Whitey taught me that people can change if they really want to." Walt's transformation was genuine. He had become an active voice against rural exploitation, using his own story as an example of the damage that greed can cause. He participated in community meetings, educating other business owners about ethical and sustainable practices. One afternoon in December, while watching Iris play in the yard with Whitey, the girl laughing as the horse let her comb his white mane, Stella reflected on how things had changed. "Who would have thought that so much pain could turn into so much joy?" she commented to Jolene, who was preparing dinner in the kitchen. "Iris taught us that even in the darkest situations there is always hope," replied Jolene. "And Whitey showed us that true love protects without expecting anything in return." At the end of that year, the Willow Creek area had transformed. The springs were being cleaned, farm workers had better conditions, and a sense of justice finally hung over the community. Iris grew up surrounded by love, protection, and the certainty that no matter how dark the beginning of a story is, there is always the possibility of a different ending. She had survived abandonment, hunger, cold, and illness, always protected by a four-legged angel who appeared in her darkest hour. And every night, when the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink, Whitey positioned himself near the window of Iris's room, standing his silent guard. He had fulfilled his mission as a protector, but knew that his work would never really end. As long as his special girl needed him, he would be there, reminding everyone that even in the most desperate moments, goodness can triumph over cruelty and love can conquer fear.